Okay, this one's going to be a little bit philosophical. I want to talk about humility. Um, what I mean by that is not perhaps in the sense of leading a sort of frugal, simple life, like a monastic sort of life, something like that. Although I respect people who make that choice. Um, I'm not talking about not enjoying life. I'm not talking about not treating yourself and also having confidence, right? So to me, there's not a contradiction in being confident, but also recognizing the power of humility. Um, Perhaps moderation is a better word, actually, because perhaps humility gives this notion that you're sort of a shrewish, introverted sort of person. I don't think it necessarily has to be that way. So perhaps moderation in personality, I don't know. Um, one thing that I've always found a bit off-putting, and I want to be careful how I word this, is advice videos. Now, whether that be in the form of life coaches, whether it be in the form of dating videos, whether it be in the form of making money, um, I find them a little off-putting because so many are presented with this sort of vain overlord, overlady kind of posture. Look at me, look how successful I am. And you could do it too, and I'll help you to do it. But to me, a more inspiring life story or a more inspiring person to follow, to listen to, is someone who says, yes, I've been successful, but I've also had shortcomings. I've also had failings. That to me is a lot more inspiring and motivational than someone that just presents themselves as perfect. I mentioned the dating video thing. When I was single, and when I was browsing online dating and other ways of looking at that, I looked at a few advice videos. I found that so many of them were presenting themselves as being relationship experts. But really, individuals are individuals. So a particular couple will have their own experience. Um, it's true, of course, that some people have more romantic luck than others. That goes without saying. But personally, a woman who came across as really full of herself would be a big, big turn off to me. I mean, I can imagine for women, a really vain guy would be a turn off. So it's the same principle, really. Um, I mean, so much in life is balance. You don't want someone who has no self confidence, but you also don't want someone who is absolutely full of it, and she or he thinks that they're an expert. To me, it's just off putting. So I'm pretty skeptical of most relationship videos because the whole pitch seems to be coming from a point of view of I'm the expert. I haven't made any mistakes. Listen to me. And I'm thinking, well, we've all made mistakes. We've all taken approaches that we might have done a bit differently. So for me, someone who's more inspiring is someone who says, yes, I've made mistakes. That to me is more realistic and therefore more inspiring rather than someone who's just talking down from on high. And I think it's true of life in general. Now, I'm also aware that, in my channel, I can be very opinionated and I am not afraid to say what's on my mind and speak up for my convictions. But those are based on things that I observe. I never claim that I'm perfect. I never claim that I'm all knowing. There's a lot of subjects I freely admit that I need to patch up on or would like to patch up on. Economics is one. I mean, I'm very interested in politics. My knowledge in economics could be better. It's something that I've, you know, um, because there's a lot of crossover with that. So I'm talking about economic theory, basically. It's something I'd like to develop and learn more about, just because it juxtaposes with politics. Um, I have a pretty good knowledge of geography and history and things like that, but there's some other things in life, and I know that I have gaps that I want to fill up. I mean, I love learning. I love finding out new things about the world. I think the world's fascinating. Um, but yeah, there's always room to learn more things. When I think of successful people, a lot of the people I admire and look up to, although I don't regard anyone as perfect, and I don't believe in idol worship, but some of the individuals I admire are people who don't shout about their greatness. As an example, to use a boxing reference, I follow the sport of boxing. I tend to gravitate more to fighters who show some humility, and yet have achieved great things. I'm thinking of guys like, in a contemporary situation, Alexander Usyk, the great Ukrainian, the world heavyweight champion. He often says he doesn't think he's one of the greats, yet he clearly is. Now that to me is refreshing. Manny Pacquiao's another example. Legendary fighter, exceptional fighter, multiple division champion. But he doesn't. He's not a trash talker. He doesn't go around talking about how great he is. Yet both guys are obviously extremely confident to do what they do. To me, that is more inspiring than fighters like Tyson Fury, or going further back, yes, I'll say it, Muhammad Ali, who are absolutely full of themselves. I mean, both Ali and Fury were constantly running their mouths about how great they were. And particularly in the case of Ali, you could argue it was accurate because he was great. He was athletically great. But I always found, I'll say it, I found Ali arrogant. He always wanted to be the centre of attention, even when it wasn't his bout. Um, so it just doesn't, that's why, I think Ali's an interesting character, but I don't know, he just doesn't inspire me as much as some other fighters who aren't that vain. And as for Tyson Fury, he just needs to stop running his mouth in general. Um, but yeah, I think there is something to be said for humility. Um, I also look at some prominent astronauts, late Jim Lovell, for example. The interesting thing I find about a lot of the Apollo astronauts is these guys had significant achievements, and yet they almost universally were normal guys. They weren't boasting. They weren't. Yeah, they probably done some PR work. They probably done some advertising and stuff like that. But um, to me, I don't know what it is. Perhaps it's a military background. Perhaps it's the way they were trained. They just come across as sincere, likable individuals for the most part. I'm sure there's outliers, like there is with every walk of life. Um, Neil Armstrong famously was very reserved. He wasn't a recluse. He was sometimes described as such. He was never a recluse, but he was reserved and he was uncomfortable with the fame. In some ways, that makes him more intriguing because, he's one of the most significant people of the 20th century, the first man on the moon, and yet he was a very reserved individual. Um, by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with being proud. I don't think there's anything wrong with um, sort of showing confidence in one's achievements and having the confidence to stand up for yourself and saying, yes, I've achieved this. I'm proud of myself. I've been through this, particularly people who've been through extreme adversity. But, it's the old trap of fame. Money, power, all of that can get to people's heads. I'll use another fighting analogy, Conor McGregor. Now, I personally don't think Conor McGregor was ever a decent person. And I don't really follow MMA, but from the commentary I see in that whole world, a lot of people think that McGregor, in the case of McGregor, the money and the power and the fame have got to him and turned him into, frankly, a complete scumbag. I personally don't think he was ever a decent person. I've never seen it. I've never seen any evidence he was, anything other than a loud bully. I've never had time for the guy. Um, so perhaps fame has different effects on different people. Um, I think it can have a negative effect on some people and a positive effect on others. Some use their fame to very good ends. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with being famous if you're bettering humanity somehow. Then, of course, there's infamous people. I watched a documentary on Einstein last night. Einstein, I think, despite being a well-renowned genius, had some humility. He had a good sense of humor, but I think he was a little bit embarrassed by the association with genius. I certainly, I'm not aware of him ever describing himself as such, but he's very famous, very prominent, a lot more prominent than other physicists, because I think he had a certain popular touch. And I suppose you could argue there's a savviness with some famous people whereby they manage to be extremely popular without being overtly vain. Yet there's a sort of savviness there with that. Um, Another famous example, uh, which I would argue was contradictory, Princess Diana. There was times she could be, have really low confidence, particularly with the pressure she felt she dealt with regarding fame. But frankly, there were times she also used her fame. I do think in that interview where she said she was the Queen of Hearts, that was a little bit manipulative. It was a bit like presenting herself as a martyr. I wasn't too fussed on that. Although I have a lot of respect for Princess Diana, I think she was a good person overall. But I do think that was a little bit like, look at me, I'm the Queen of Hearts, and she, the monarch, is just the Queen. I don't know, I just thought it was a bit flippant. Um, so yeah, I'm just giving open thoughts here on some famous examples. I'm sure there's many others, but it's why I don't have much time for successful people who are incredibly condescending to others, the likes of Gordon Ramsay, the chef. Um, the whole his whole thing is yelling in people's faces and saying how much better he is than they are. Well, he is successful, he's wealthy, he's famous, but to me, what he's primarily famous for is yelling in people's faces. I mean, my argument would be there's other successful chefs that don't have to do that, so it's not really evidence that you have to behave that way. I don't have time for it. Finally, I guess I can be judgmental. I guess I could be opinionated as much as anyone, but I fully recognize my shortcomings. I mean, this is a small channel. The graphics aren't wonderful. Um, Sometimes I could word things better than I do. Okay, so that's me openly looking at this because in the future, if this channel expands, I don't want to become an arrogant rich guy. I don't want to ever change my fundamental personality in terms of how I approach this. That's just not something, you know. Um, The great Olympian rower Steve Redgrave said, "If anyone ever sees me in a boat again, you have my permission to shoot me," I think were his words, because he came out of a particular race, he was exhausted. Well, this is an open thing to my subscribers. If I ever become an arrogant creator, if this channel greatly expands and I become extremely arrogant and sort of make out like I'm better than everyone else, please, please call me out. I don't want to become that sort of person. I don't want to, you know, if I was in a position of great financial success, obviously I'd be in a much better position than I'm in now. And yeah, I'd do things for myself and people I care about, but I'd also hopefully set up the sort of base foundation of things that I would like to do to help others. But if I ever become an arrogant rich guy, I hope I'm called out for it. I'd like to be a rich guy, but I'd like to be a decent rich guy, if I could put it that way. Okay, humility. It's a strong thing. And I didn't really mention this in the video, I'll mention it briefly. Apologizing, saying you're sorry when you have messed up is not a weakness. I'm very suspicious of people who can never bring themselves to say the word sorry. That's a questionable personality trait. Let me know your thoughts. Cheers.